amazing to see folks coming from all over the world. As you know, I love normal circumstances. I love traveling to teach workshops, and I'm excited to do that once again. But I'm thrilled to be partnering with Sonoma Ceramics on these virtual workshops. It's so nice to make them accessible to folks who either are not normally able to sort of get away for a couple of days, or are in parts of the world that would be harder for me to get to. So much as I hope someday to come to Hawaii or New Zealand, I saw some of you folks online. I'm grateful for you all that you're signing up now. I'm a full-time studio artist. I'm Canadian. I did my MFA at Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So I do occasionally say y'all and a all in the same sentence. I make no apologies for that. I'm currently in my home studio in Stratford, Ontario. I recently, I've been moving around the US for the past several years, different residencies and job opportunities and learning things, and just recently settled in Stratford, Ontario, Canada, which is southwest of Toronto by about 2 hours. Beautiful little, normally tourist town. And yeah, I have a studio in my basement, and I'm excited to be demonstrating some of my surface techniques for everybody. A couple nuts and bolts thing, I did mention this in the chat earlier, but it may have gotten buried. The clay body I use is Standard Ceramics 266 stoneware. It's from Standard Ceramics in Pittsburgh. It's fires to a lovely chocolate brown color. I fire it to a hot cone 5 in an electric kiln. It's a beautiful clay. It's nice to work with. It's very finicky with firing though. So it's not a clay that I recommend if you can't control your own firings, because if it fires to a true cone 6, it'll start to float. And it's kind of tricky with glazes and all that kind of thing. So all of the techniques that I'm showing today will work with any clay and any temperature range. You just obviously want to, do some tests beforehand. All the colors that I'm using are Amico Velvet underglazes. I believe there was a list of the main colors that I use in the tool list, but these techniques again will work with any underglazes. I personally really like the Amico products. They've got some the velvet underglazes. They've got this handy brochure that sort of shows you all the different colors, and a lot of them, including the reds, will fire to a cone 10, which is kind of unusual. So I really like the products, but these techniques will work with any underglazes. And then my slip recipe, I believe, also was included in the information that y'all got. So I'm gonna just dive right in and get started. I want to say there's a lot of information that I'm going to be throwing at y'all, and rest assured, I'm going to do everything multiple times. It's not like a one and done kind of thing. I'm repeating these processes many different ways. So if you sort of miss something, I'll come back to it. But that being said, please do ask Lexi and if you have any questions. So all of my work, as I said, it's sort of hand built. And part of the reason that I hand build is because I like to add this texture on my work. And so I actually texture the slabs of clay before I even make something. Like if you were in my hand built cup workshop the other week, before I make this cup, I texture the slab of clay and then form the cup. So the way that I add texture is a couple different ways. Usually I do it, I decorate the work when it's more at a stiff leather hard stage, but I texture it and form it before that. So I'm just going to show you quickly how I texture the slabs using a variety of tools. These serrated mud tools. I'll maybe go over the side angle now, Lex. These serrated mud tools, and you can get them in a variety of serratednesses. And then I also have these. I'm just trying to find the best light for this. Where is it? Not there. It was there. Okay. These textured bisque rollers that I make, they're just made. I made them. I think actually I made these in Sonoma out of a hollow. I extruded them out of clay, hollow die, and then let them set up to leather hard, and then carved or like stamped into them, and then I bisque fire them, and then I can use them. That by bisque firing, it makes them nice and durable. But then I can use them on the clay, and it won't stick to the clay the way like wood or plastic would. But you can use any type of tool for texturing. There's lots of great stuff you can find around the house or outdoors. Fabric, all that kind of thing works really great. It's super fun to texture with. I will say that my texture doesn't tend to be super deep. It's like I don't have deep gouges in places, and that's just an aesthetic thing for the decorating. But so I usually start with the serrated ribbed, sort of, I think about the textures in like a weave of fabric. So I start with a finer weave of fabric, like a finer weave texture, and then go to a more opened up weave. So the clay here, I'll just talk this again. This is when I would form it. So it's like a suede. It's not leather hard yet. You can texture it at the leather hard stage. It's just harder to get the texture in. And I don't like to texture it too soft because then the texture is really deep and smushy. So I tend to wait until it's got some nice give to it and you can see the sheen, but it's not like picking up my fingerprints. So I'm going to start with the serrated tool and I just sort of texture it all over in different movements. And then I go with my rollers and I just sort of press lightly in all over, and I like to overlap them. And I have, favorite rollers that I use, but I try and mix it up if I can. So then I've got this nice texture on the clay. You can kind of see it there. You can see that texture and how the different layers are kind of coming through. And that you'll see that texture will be picked up a lot more later on when I decorate. So again, at this point, I would then form with this slab, like form my cup or whatever, and let it set up to leather hard. Then I'll decorate. But I've done that already. I'm gonna start decorating on some tiles. And I know that's what I'd encourage folks if people are sort of following along to decorate with. I like using tiles because, I think of it as a low investment object. It didn't take me a ton of time to make these tiles. These are thicker ones. They're almost half an inch thick. You can do them a bit thinner. I do struggle with them, the tiles warping a bit. So that's why I'm trying this a bit thicker. But these are really just test tiles, I think of them. And again, the tiles are really great because you can sort of try out a bunch of different techniques in a really easy, fun way, sort of low investment of time, and not, versus I don't necessarily want to try out something brand new on a cup or a mug that's taken me a little while to make. For the colors that I use, I tend to have, and you'll see behind me on the wall, those test tiles. If I'm trying out new colors, I'll just make a little test tile where I'll put a bunch of different colors, on the clay, put my white slip over it and glaze and just sort of test and see how the colors go. Because this clay is so dark, it really affects the colors a lot. I think of this, and what I like about this clay body is that it's this really beautiful chocolate brown color that acts as sort of this ground for all the decoration that I'm doing later on. And so if I were to do these same colors on a white clay, it would be a very different look. They would kind of look a little garish, I think, but because it's on a dark chocolate clay, that clay is really influencing the colors that are going on top of it. So I've got my underglazes. I'm going to talk just a second about brushes. I like to have natural bristle brushes for decorating with slip and underglaze, because the natural, like the sort of follicles on the natural bristle, they really hold a lot of material. So I can get, a lot of distance out of my brush when I, put underglaze or slip on it. And I like just inexpensive brushes. I'm just using them to put down color. I'm not really doing much line quality with these brushes. So I'd rather have a lot of brushes of varying sizes. So you see I've got these sort of, it's more of a chipped size brush. I think this is called a chip brush, where it's like a flat edge that I use for covering large areas. I think you can get these at Chinese Clay Art Co. You can buy like a bunch of like 12, or I know the Archie Bray Clay business sells these as well online. They're just called like a hake brush. I like the ones personally where, and I'll go to the side here, I don't like these ones that have the open, this is called the ferrule of the brush. I don't like it when it's open there, because what happens is the underglaze gets stuck in there and that'll like drip in weird times. So I like these ones because it's closed up, but that's just a personal preference. There's nothing wrong with the other brushes. And then I have these smaller ones in a variety of sizes. And again, these are super inexpensive brushes. As you can tell, I don't really clean my brushes very well. Like, this is just always my blue brush and this is my red brush. You know, and then they do tend to fall apart, and I just use some duct tape on them. So as I said, I like to have a whole bunch of brushes. And then what I'm using in terms of for pattern is newspaper resists that I've cut out ahead of time. I like to use, for newspaper, I prefer to use a rough textured newspaper. It doesn't have to be this brand, but I do like it when it specifically says rough texture. I think this is like a 30-pound newsprint, because the rough texture of the newsprint sort of holds the underglaze a bit better, and that will make sense a little better later on. But the smooth textured newsprint I don't like it as much. Again, that's a personal preference, but you can use, you know, used newspapers. I do find though that they break down a bit faster because they've been through a printing press. So I tend not to like to use those. I like to use a clean, fresh newspaper, but you can certainly experiment, you know, if you don't have any, you can experiment with little flyers or whatnot. And then all the line work on my work, like the element, these sort of like graphic elements, I'll sort of tell a bit more on this one, this graphic element here. They're actually scanned from old family letters and correspondence. They then enlarge and then cut out of newsprint. I use a laser cutter. I don't sadly own a laser cutter, but I spent time on a laser cutter to cut those out because they're really fine elements, and to cut that out by hand would take forever, and I also wouldn't get that lovely swoop. But you don't have to, you know, that laser cutter is just it's sort of specific to what I'm trying to get, but you can also just cut things out. I have some that I'm going to work with today that I cut out by hand. You know, I'll get a shape that I like and then repeat it and just cut it out with scissors or a X-Acto knife. And then I also sometimes use craft stores, or I love going to the craft store and just wandering, like these paper punches that this like punches out circles, you know, in scrapbooking section. You can get some fun things there. So lots of different ways to get pattern. And I'm going to be sort of experimenting with a bit of all of them. And so what I always do, again, I'd like to decorate at the leather hard stage, and there's a few reasons for that. One, I'm introducing a lot of moisture because I'm going to be adding a couple of layers of underglazes and then slip. And so if my work is too wet, it's just the layers aren't going to dry. They're going to get all kind of soupy and won't dry. And then especially if I'm decorating something, you know, a form like a cup, if it's too wet when I'm decorating it and add all this other moisture, it's going to just like deform and get all floppy and kind of, you know, sag and fall apart. So I also don't want to decorate it too dry because then the slip won't adhere to it. So I like a fairly stiff leather hard. Hopefully these tiles are good. I did them a bit later today. So these are all textured up, and I'm going to start by laying down a first ground color. I'm going to start, one of my favorite colors to use is the bright red, Amico Velvet. I often joke that I like all the expensive colors. So it's a really beautiful red color, and there's no way I could make that red color on my own. So I'm gonna, just shuffling things around here a little bit. I'm gonna use one of my big brushes, this chip brush in the underglaze, and I just sort of load it up, and I'm gonna be pretty liberal with how I apply it and sort of try and get it in all the texture there. And I just do one liberal coat pretty much. If you look on the jars, they'll say to do, 3 coats if you want a solid color, but I actually want the colors to be slightly translucent, and you'll see why shortly. So I'm gonna When I'm decorating, I always decorate a couple things at a time because I'm doing different layers. I need things to sort of dry and set up. So I'm going to do that red color on another tile here. And again, this is where it's nice to have that natural bristle brush because it really just holds a lot of material. And it's, you know, I am trying to get it in the texture for the most part with this ground layer. So I've got a nice sort of base color. So it's kind of all covered over there. And then I'm gonna pick some of my newspaper cutouts that I want to use. And a lot of the decisions that I'm making, you know, when it comes to this, you know, obviously I went to art school, so I'm making decisions on composition and balance and unity and stuff like that. And my color decisions, I do have these sort of color palettes that I work with, like this more reddy orange color palette, and then there is a blue color palette that I use as well. As you can see, I love the color blue, but it doesn't translate as well to this kind of demonstration. It's a little more subtle, so I'm going to be using more my reds, red color palettes. And I've, you know, tested these colors, so I know how I like, you know, how they work over top of each other and things like that. So it's, I always recommend, you know, everything that I'm showing you today, I developed over, you know, several years of working with these products. So it's, you know, best to try things out and see what you like and the colors that you like. And some colors don't, you know, like with my clay body, there are some colors that just don't work very well on it because the dark chocolate color of it just like kind of washes them out. So I'm gonna pick my newspaper elements and sort of get a sense of where I want to put them. And then this is when, just shuffling some things around here, I'm going to pick a contrasting color. So I'm going to do the flame orange. It's another favorite color. And I've got usually with my jars of underglaze, I like to have a couple, like a small brush and then a big brush in them. Again, I like to have variety. So I've got my newspaper cutouts, and I'm going to brush underglaze on one side of them. And I have a piece of newsprint that I'm going to put my other piece of newsprint on and brush it on top of that because it can get kind of messy. So I've got my brush. And I'm just got my little newspaper cutout, brush the underglaze on it. Oops, flipped on me there. So I'm using the newsprint as both a stamp and kind of a resist for color. So I'm going to pick that up, and then I'm going to put it underglaze side down on top of the tile. And then I just use my finger to kind of squeegee it on. And some of that underglaze is seeping out the edges, which is totally fine. And I'm gonna do the same thing with the other newspaper cutout. Just brush, I'm sticking with the orange here. Brush that underglaze side down, sticking it on the tile. And then I like to, for a couple of reasons, sort of I'm gonna encircle those underglaze or those newspaper cutouts with contrasting colors, another accent color, for a couple of reasons. One, I visually like how that looks. And also because of this texture on the tile, that sort of seal around the newsprint cutout is not perfect because it's on a textured surface. So by outlining it in another color, that sort of seeps in to any of those like ridges and stuff and kind of forms a seal around that, which then when I peel it away with the white slip over it will be nice and clean. And it's sort of, this other color kind of bleeds in along the edges in a way that I really like. So I'm gonna go, and I always try and sort of balance the colors. I love bright primary colors, as you can tell. But I like to, you know, when I'm doing the red color palette, I always have a little of the blue in there, and the blue I usually have some warm colors too to kind of balance things a little bit. So this is the blue color that I use, which is the teal, teal blue. And it ends up being quite a dark color when on. Some of them, and you can tell this one, this underglaze it's a bit thicker. It's more like a thick Greek yogurt consistency in the container, whereas other ones like this yellow is much thinner. So sometimes I would maybe thin it out with a little bit of water. I usually keep a spray bottle and we'll just spray a bit in the top to thin it out.
Do you ever use colored slips, Naomi?
That's a great question. So I don't currently use colored slips. I did some tests this summer with colored slips, but some of these techniques actually were developed from watching an artist, his name is Martine Lanton, and she does this technique with colored slips. So you can totally do it with colored slips. It just, the slips are less transparent, obviously, than the underglazes are. So it's just a different effect. But yeah, all these techniques will work with colored slips. So I'm just going to outline those newspaper elements with the blue. Brushing that on.
Hey, Naomi.
Yeah.
Do you wait for the previous coat of underglaze to dry before you put the next coat? For example, did you wait for red to dry before you put the orange, and orange to dry before you put the...
So I did, you can see the red is not shiny anymore. It's not like bone dry, and that it, it's not chalky, but it isn't wet to the touch. The orange, because it's underneath, I didn't worry about that. I outlined it right away, but I did wait for the red to dry. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. And I'm gonna go in and add some accent colors with this yellow. I'm gonna put a bigger brush in there. And this is where I'm gonna try and pick up some of the texture that's going on. I'm gonna go this way. By having, and I'll show it to the side. I've got my brush charged, and then it sort of thins out towards the end. So it really picks up that texture. I think that I refer to that as scumbling, which I think is a painting technique where the brush sort of scumbles over the texture. And so that's an effect I really enjoy, and will often try and sort of accentuate. And so then I'm going to let that set up a little more.
Naomi, did you put resist on that one?
That one had it has the newspaper on it.
Okay, so you paint over the newspaper.
Yeah, so under the blue area is where those little bits of newspaper that I painted orange are stuck, and then I outline them in blue. I'm gonna do it again on another tile. So you can see I kind of work on a couple of things at once because I'm waiting for layers to dry. In my studio, I would normally work on, if I'm doing something smaller like cups and mugs, I might work on 4 or 5. For bigger things, maybe 2 or 3, just so I can move back and forth and not just like stand around and wait for things. So I'm going to show a slightly different, another technique that you can use for underpainting. This is just the remnant from when I used my hole punch to cut out circles. So this is the sort of leftover from that. And I'm just going to cut it down a bit smaller. Scissors. Whoop. And then I want this to act as a slight resist area. So this one, I'm gonna spritz it with water actually to get it wet enough to stick down onto this is the one that I painted with red underglaze already. So I could stick this in a bucket of water, but it would be really hard to get it out successfully. So I've got my little spray mister, and I'm just gonna spray it so it's evenly sort of saturating this newsprint with water. And I'm doing that so that it will kind of stick to the underglazed surface. And I'm gonna stick it down onto the tile that has the red on it. And because it was wet, it's kind of adhering to the underglaze. Not totally perfectly, so some areas I'm just going in with a damp sponge to get it wet. So it looks like that right now. There's just the red and then this newsprint over top of it. And now I'm gonna brush another color over it. I'm gonna go with the orange, the flame orange. Oh, starting to get low.
We have a question about your sprayer brand. Do you have one?
Oh yeah, you know what? I was given this at a workshop because Jason Beige Burnett introduced me to this sprayer. You can get them on Amazon. I don't know what they're called. It's like a continuous mist sprayer, I think.
Called like Flarasols.
Oh, Flarasols, yeah.
Yeah. It's also like a Martha Grover, like forever. That's how I got one at a workshop.
Thank you. Yeah, so it's called a Flarasol, which is a freaking fantastic name.
Okay, handy.
So now I'm gonna brush, I've got the red down and then I've got newspaper, and I'm gonna brush over the whole surface with orange. And so where I've put that newspaper down is like it's not gonna get orange wherever that newspaper cutout was. So this is sort of the opposite of what I did before. Normally these newspaper cutouts are kind of a one-time use thing. I specifically like using newspaper for a number of reasons because it absorbs some of the material, which you'll sort of see that later on. But I'm going to show you now how you can use it a second time. So this is a blank tile that I haven't decorated. I haven't put any color down yet. And I've got this was the one with the newspaper with the orange. And I'm gonna peel that up while the underglaze is still wet. And then I'm gonna stick this underglaze side down on my fresh tile. And I'm just gonna probably use a little my red rib a little bit just to squeeze that down a bit more. Okay, so the orange is underneath there, and this is the one where I pulled it up. So it's sort of this underpainting that I'm doing. These layers that will be underneath. And now I'm gonna go and put, I'll do red over top of this one.
Naomi, do you when you first sprayed the newsprint, did you let it dry before you applied the orange, or it doesn't matter?
No, it doesn't really matter because the clay, it wasn't super saturated. Because if I put it in a bucket, I might need to let it dry a little bit. So there, I've got that. And then I can, and if I had another tile, I've got a little one. You can sort of, eventually they kind of break down because, the newsprint isn't super strong, but I'm gonna then put that, now I've got red on it. Red side down here. And I haven't mentioned, so there's the one where I had that, the orange. All of these boards that I'm working on, they're drywall boards. I like to work on drywall boards because it's a nice smooth surface, and they also wick some of the moisture out. You can tell I've got them all edged with tape because I don't want any of that plaster to get in my clay. So I just use duct tape or painter's tape to do the edges. I prefer using the the thicker drywall, the 5/8 inch drywall. Oops.
Do you ever use Tyvek or other paper for pattern reuse? Or
Oh, you know what? I haven't. I just went ahead and tried. I put that yellow bit down there just to see what it would do. I don't use Tyvek, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One, I'm going to put white slip over top of these now. And if I was using Tyvek, when I outlined, remember how I outlined those orange bits? The newspaper is absorbing some of the moisture from the underglaze. So it means it's not wet anymore. So that when I then go brush my white slip over top, it's not getting all muddy into my white slip. If that was Tyvek, it wouldn't, you know, the white slip, it wouldn't dry because the Tyvek is like a plastic type material. But I do know people like Adrienne Aliatis is an artist who uses Tyvek, and other people who use Tyvek, and then you can reuse it. But it doesn't really work for the application that I'm using it for, because I'm using it as a stamp and a resist for color, and I'm doing multiple layers. I think the Tyvek is better if you're just doing like one layer kind of thing. But it's certainly you could experiment with.
do you ever use a heat gun between coats or blow dryer?
I tend not to use the heat gun when it just like, that's, my work is so labor intensive as it is. I would rather just let stuff air dry. So this one, yeah, so I tend not to. So this, maybe I'll put this on the side view because you can see some of the layers a little bit better. That's a bit better with the light. So you can see all those different colors coming through, and because the newsprint is absorbing some of that moisture, it's not a perfect transfer, which I really like because it adds to that sort of layered, weathered look. And that's sort of the surface that I'm going for. And again, that's just purely aesthetic. That's an aesthetic decision. You know, you don't, and I could leave them like this as they are now. I'm gonna just show you, I'm gonna put white slip on this first tile I decorated and then peel up the transfer so that you can sort of see it from start, you know, how it looks at the end. And then I'll go ahead and keep decorating the other things. So I've got this white slip, and I believe you all got the recipe for that in your registration. So I just mix that by hand. It's based off of the Vince Patelka all temperature slip recipe. So it should be fine at like 04 and cone 10. Again, I would test it with your clay body and your firing range because everything is different. But I mix it, I added graw leg instead of the original recipe had EPK, and the graw leg is just a bit whiter, which I prefer. I don't have a specific gravity for this. I sort of do it by touch. It's semi-translucent. Again, the original recipe I think had 8% zirca packs. Mine just has 3% zirca packs, so that helps it be sort of, zirca packs is a whitener and a pacifier. So it helps it be a bit more translucent. And it's fairly thin, but I should note that not all of this thinness is because of water. I mix it with water to a thick, very thick yogurt consistency. And then I'll start thinning it and add a little bit of sodium silicate to deflocculate it. And what sodium silicate does is or a Darvan or another deflocculant allows, it makes the particles repel so that it's more fluid, but you're not adding more water. And because if I kept adding more water to make it thinner, then I would run into shrinkage issues with the clay. So I use sodium silicate is really powerful. So I actually just dilute it. You know, I think this is like 1 part sodium silicate to 4 parts water. And then I just like squeeze a little bit in when I want to thin it out. And I just sort of do it by feel and touch. So for my slip brushes, those are ones where my slip brushes are the same brushes I use for the other decorating, but I just use them for slip because I don't want to get the underglaze colors in them. And one tip I found, and this one I didn't wash very well the last time. One tip I found, what'll happen, especially if I'm decorating, you know, for the day, is this part is called the ferrule on a brush, I believe, and the wooden handle and the material in there, it will start absorbing the moisture from the slip, and then you'll get sort of like this, the inside will be all sort of dry on the brush, whereas the outside will be wet, and it won't hold as much material. But I don't want to just get this brush totally wet, because then it will be too wet. So what I do is I just use my little spritzifier or whatever it was called, and I spray the inside of the brush. So I'm just adding a little bit of moisture to the inside there, and that seems to help. Again, that's just a preference thing. It just helps add a little bit of moisture, but not too much. And with the slip as well, also, I like to have a couple different size brushes in there. And one thing you may notice, I'm putting the brush in, and then I'm like pouncing it on the bottom of the container, because I want all that slip to get up inside the brush, not just on the outside. So by sort of like pouncing it up and down on the bottom, and that's why I tend to keep the slip, my slip thing, you know, maybe just this full. And I have a bigger bucket that I then add to, but I like to be able to get my brush at the bottom and not have the whole handle covered in slip. So now I've got this tile, and I'll just remind you what steps I did. So I did the texture, and then I put the red underglaze on. Then I had my newspaper cutouts that I brushed orange on and stuck them orange side down. And then I brushed blue over those cutouts, and then brushed some yellow accent colors there. And now they're all dry to the touch. It's not, this underglaze looks leather hard, like it's melded in with the clay. And so I've got my slip brush, and I'm gonna go, and this is where the brush marks really do show up for the slip in the final piece. In the underglazes, the brush marks don't really show up. But here you can really see like where my brush had more material on it, and where it was a bit drier over this texture and stuff like that. So I really want this brush mark to be a very fluid gesture. I don't want to be hesitant with it. If I'm decorating, sorry, is there a question?
Yeah, would you say that your slip is more translucent because you like it thinner?
Yeah, it's translucent partly because I'm applying it a bit thinner. Sometimes I'll have two different buckets of underglaze, like one that's thin like this and one that's a bit thicker if I want there to be thicker areas. I like the variety. It's also a bit more translucent because I'm only adding 3% Zirca Pax as opposed to the 8% that is normally in it. If I had the 8%, it would be more opaque because Zirca Pax is an opacifier. So I'm just gonna brush the slip on, and that's when I usually think about where I'm gonna put the slip before I do it, because those brush strokes do matter. When I was at Sonoma Ceramics, actually for my show there, I had these big platters that I did, these big wall platters, and I would like almost practice the brush movement ahead of time, because you kind of get one shot with it. You know, and if I'm decorating something smaller, I'll have a smaller brush, something bigger, I'll have a bigger brush so that it holds more material. So I'm just going to go for it on here, and I'm just brushing that slip on. And it's sort of picking up the texture as well. And then I'm going to go in, and I have these circular brushes, and I'm going to go in, so I put those main ones down with a flat brush and add a couple little accent areas. And so where I'm overlapping the slip, it'll be slightly thicker. And so it's kind of hard to tell. It looks like I've sort of just obliterated everything there. But you can see some of those colors coming through. You kind of see the blue. And so normally I would wait. I usually wait until the slip is sort of drop like more leather hard to peel away the newspaper resists, but I'm gonna just peel them away right now so you can sort of see the whole thing. So, and these are easier ones because the tails are sort of at the end there. And the reveal is always the most fun. This is my favorite part, peeling it away, because and so then you can see, oops, sorry, how that orange and the red is kind of coming through there. Because of that transfer wasn't completely perfect because the newsprint is absorbing some of that moisture, which
Did you have the teal color on that one?
yeah, so you can sort of see it. It's sort of haloing the orange, and there's little moments where it's seeped through. It's kind of hard to tell, but the teal is, let's see, here's an example where the teal blue there is underneath the white slip. And so you can see it, the teal is a really strong color. So it does come through.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people are asking about slips and whether they could use their own slip recipes or if white underglaze or stroke and coat would work. And yeah, can you use pre-made slip with additions? Those kinds of questions.
Okay, yeah, great questions. So I've tried this before with white underglaze. There's a couple of reasons why I don't like that. And that's a personal aesthetic choice. You could certainly do this with white underglaze. The one thing with the white underglaze is meant sort of not to show brush strokes as much, right? Like it's nice and even, which is why it's like such a great product in many ways. But I really like that the white slip adds this sort of different texture and brush stroke. And the white underglaze is very translucent, which again, that's an aesthetic choice. And it's also this very bright white. This white has a bit of warmth to it with the slip. But again, that's just an aesthetic choice. You could certainly try this with a white underglaze or tint the underglaze, or use an ivory underglaze, something like that. In terms of the slip, yeah, you can definitely, it doesn't have to be my slip recipe. My slip recipe is sort of designed to be kind of translucent. So I would just, as I recommend with everything, just test it. And that's where, these, like a little test towel like this can really come in handy. Just, put some texture on, slap a couple colors of underglaze, and then I just brushed some white slip over top of it and tried it out. And then you can get a sense too for like thickness and thinness and what works for you and what aesthetic you like. And you don't have to add the white slip. That's just something I'm doing, that's an aesthetic decision. There's no reason technically that you have to add that white slip. So if you really liked, like this part of me really loves this tile here. So things that, it could be nice just not even put any white slip on it. You don't have to. It's just, I do it because, there's so much going on with my work that I find the white slip is sort of this nice moment of kind of pause. And it softens it a little bit. It's not quite so garish. But again, that's just an aesthetic choice. You certainly don't have to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to do these techniques again on the other tiles, and then I've got some forms that I'm going to do them on as well. I'm just going to finish up these tiles, and then I'll do the other. I've got a cup, one of the cups that I made the other week, that I'm going to decorate.
Naomi, do you have a max amount of layers you can do before you get peeling or bubbling happening?
Yeah, that's another really good question. What I tend to do, like three, maybe four, like 3-ish layers plus the 2 to 3 layers plus the slip. What'll happen is if you get too many layers, it just kind of gets a bit soupy, and they kind of blend together, and it gets kind of it just doesn't work quite as well. So I, knock on wood, haven't had a lot of trouble with peeling. What will happen though is if the work is too dry before I add the slip, then sometimes the slip will like lift off in areas where it's thicker. So that's where you sort of need to watch the dryness. Again, these are a definite leather hard. And then I dry everything really slowly. Like after I decorate it, I dry everything quite slowly. I just brush some yellow under that. I'm gonna pop this circle down. Yeah, so and it's also at a certain point with the layers, they just end up obliterating each other, So I find like 2 to 3 layers plus the slip is probably a good place for me, for what I like to do. And again, these are the great thing about this technique is it's really translatable to lots of different things. And, partly I developed this because I was, I never really thought of myself as an artist because I can't draw. I can't draw to save my life. So, I would get to the surface of my pots and always be super intimidated and like not know what to do, and then just, blindly dip and dunk things in the glaze kitchen and wonder why I wasn't happy with my work. So this technique really helped me get some of that graphic quality and layers that I wanted, but with, in a different way, in a more sort of graphic way, which I like.
Is the slip ever your first layer?
Oh, it isn't. I think again, because the slip is thicker, the underglaze, dries pretty quickly and is fairly thin. I was just putting a fairly thin coat of the underglaze on but you could try it. I mean, I think it could be cool. I did try some tests up here. This summer when I was a resident at the Archie Bray, where I use, instead of putting underglaze on, sort of hard to tell, but instead of putting underglaze on the newspaper cutout, I put slip on it, and it textured much differently. And this was actually one, you see that sort of bluey gray circle where I put a colored slip as the final layer. Nice. Over a newspaper cutout. And so these were some, fun test tiles. This is a great example of a test tile that's like, oh, there's some really great information and ideas there that I know I'm gonna get back to at some point. Yeah, but you could certainly try it. I think it would just be harder to get the underglaze would then kind of mush in with the slip, I feel like, but it's, the great thing about ceramics, and the infuriating thing about it is that and I would always, I think there's some students from Sonoma Ceramics on, my response when I was a resident there to certain questions, people would ask like, oh, Naomi, if I do this and this and this, will that work? And I would inevitably respond with, it depends, which would infuriate. There was one member, Nancy, I think she was at the cup one, but she was like, I just want an answer. And I was like, ceramics is not the place for that kind of thing. Like, and I remember it, when I was at LSU, I was teaching as part of my grad program, and I would, students be like, hey, what if I do this? And in my head, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is totally not going to work out. Like, this is so going to fall apart in the kiln, or it's going to explode, or something bad is going to happen here. And then it would work, it would be amazing, and it would like totally surprise me, which was awesome. So just
tactile, everybody.
Yeah. Test. It depends, and do a test.
Test.
Yeah.
But you want to do it now. You don't want to test.
Oh, that's the frustrating thing. Let's get these circles. All right. And this is the decorating is the one thing in the studio I do find it a little tougher to talk while I'm doing it, because it's when I'm in the studio, if I'm making and constructing stuff, I can talk on the phone to friends. or listen to a book on tape or something like that. But if I'm decorating, like I can sort of listen to classical music or something, but so if you see me losing my train of thought, that's what's happening, because it's like using my brain in a slightly different way, I guess. But yeah, and the nice thing again about this technique is it can be really fun to just play around with. After I'm gonna finish this one, actually no, maybe I'm gonna switch to decorating the pre-made forms as opposed to the tiles, just so I can get to those, and then I'll go back to this tile if I have time later. So sort of translating these techniques, and one thing too that I like about the tiles is that it's basically a two-dimensional surface, right? It's like a blank canvas. And you'll notice with a lot of my forms, I do tend to have straighter sides or very gentle curves, because the newspaper cutouts sometimes don't fit as well around like a really extreme curve. So my work is sort of designed with this technique in mind, in a way. So I've got this cup that I made, and one thing that's sort of different when I'm doing it on a piece of work, I really like to have these bare clay bits, and I'll maybe just pull to the side, Lex. So the rim and the foot here are the bare clay, and that's just my raw clay, and it has this beautiful chocolate brown. It's like a chocolate stone, porcelain almost, and I can leave it bare because it's very vitreous at temperature. If this was a earthenware, I wouldn't want to do that because it would still be absorptive, but it's not at all absorptive. So I know I want to leave this area bare in the foot as well, and so I don't want to be conscious of that rim and edge when I'm decorating, because if I'm really conscious of trying not to get underglaze on it, like I don't like decorating to an edge, because then you can sense the hesitation in my movements. So I wax those edges at the leather hard stage. So you can see I've already done that because it's really boring to watch me do it. I just sort of use a brush for wax, and I've got these lines that I put in when I made the cup that sort of help me hit that area really easily, and define that rim. So, and what that does, one, I love the contrast in texture between this, the sort of polished stone and the glossier glaze. And it also, the clay color itself is so beautiful, and it offers this sort of visual pause. The way that I get that circle there, waxing that circle would be a real pain in the butt to try and get it perfect, and would take forever. So I use these circle cutouts, and I'm just going to dip it in clean water and then stick it right on this leather hard cup in the place that I want it to be bare clay. So I'm just sticking that down, and I use my damp sponge a little bit just to get it on. And so now I'm going to brush. I'm going to use the red again. I'm going to brush the red over this whole thing. I think I saw, did someone have a question about the glaze inside? I saw it pop up. It is, I do glaze the inside of everything. It's a I don't know if you can tell, it's an orange color, and that's just so everything gets a clear glaze on the outside, and then a liner glaze, which is actually just my clear glaze with mason stain added. And I think that recipe was included in the recipes. If not, there's a PDF on my website. Was it included, Lex?
Included, yep.
Yeah, so that is a really great clear recipe. It was from my undergrad at the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design in Canada. And what I like about that is it brushes, dips, and pours really well. And so I like being able to brush a wax, a glaze, because for my big platters and stuff, it allows me I hate having to spray glaze. And I also, you know, now in my home studio, I don't have a spray gun. So, and the interior glaze of my work, the colored glaze is just my clear glaze with 5 to 10% of mason stain added. So I'm just gonna, you can see that underglaze is still really shiny. I'm just gonna let that set up. And then I've got these little trays. And this is, my next workshop with Sonoma Ceramics is hand-built trays. I think it's not this Saturday, but the following Saturday. And this is, I'm gonna show how I make these little trays and some other small dishes. These are sort of a nice transition from the tiles to they're sort of something I'll often test new things on. To use something I tested on a tile, and then I want to start bringing it into the work. So I've already put the underglaze on here beforehand, just so you didn't have to watch it.
Do you sand all your bare clay areas after?
Yes, great question. I do. So I sand all of my work twice because I'm a masochist. So I sand it at the bisque stage. I wet sand it, and there's a couple of reasons I do that. One, I want to hit all those bare clay areas, and also sometimes those areas where I pulled up the newspaper and the slip can get the slip line can be a little sharp. So I wet sand with a 220, sort of like just these sanding sponges. They're Norton sanding sponge, and wet sanding is really important because the dust can be hazardous. So that means I don't have to wear a mask or anything. I just, have clean water. And I don't spend a ton of time. I spend maybe a little more time, if it's a mug on the handles or the foot. And then after the glaze firing, I use a 600 grit sandpaper, a wet, dry sandpaper. So I'm just grabbing my newspaper cutout, and I'm gonna do just the same thing. Again, I've got the red down already, and I think for this one, I'll do blue on the newspaper. Just stick it down. And a lot of my, inspiration color-wise, I grew up in a home that was really very colorful. My parents collected art. They had a lot of friends who were artists. They collected art from a young age. So, it was the 60s when they were collecting. So everything was super colorful, bright, sort of pop art, walls. I often joke, if I ever really wanted to disappoint my parents, I'd live in a beige home. They would be like, where did we go wrong? So color for me is like very familiar and very, it's home for me. And I know that these sort of bright colors are bizarre to a lot of people. It was funny, a couple of weeks ago, I did this Instagram live stream from my parents' house. I've been going to get them groceries and stuff like that. And I did an Instagram live cocktail hour from my parents' house, sort of showing some of my pots throughout the years that I made, and those like horrible pots I wish my mom would let me have back so I could smash them, but she won't. Anyways, and I was showing the art that really influenced me in the colors, and my Eric Botville, who owner of Companion Gallery in Tennessee, carries some of my work. He was like, yeah, I tuned in, and he was like, if I hadn't have known, like if someone had just shown me photos of that house and the art and asked me to pick like what artist grew up there, I would have picked you. So that was interesting. So I just put an accent, colors around that newspaper thing. And then you can see, if you want to pull over to the side, Lex, how I did wax this beforehand. So it had like just a little wax edge there. I don't know if you can see the blue, it's kind of beaded up along that wax line. So the wax doesn't totally resist the underglaze, but it beads up easily, and it means I can just go with my sponge and just wipe it super easily and not have to worry about it. And then I'll let that set up before I put the white slip on.
Have you ever used like a porcelain or white clay with a dark slip, like done the opposite of what you do?
Oh, cool. Yeah, that's a, so I did actually for that, Amico is on the cover. I'm just sort of grabbing, whoops. The cover of, this was the Amico, their 100th anniversary, Amico Brent, and that's, they sent out these clay jars, like a half version of these jars to 100 different artists and had us decorate them, and they were just, you know, they were porcelain slip cast. And so I did one where I decorated the porcelain one in my colors, but I didn't like it. And so for that one, actually, I put a slip, my clay slip over the porcelain and then did my decorating. It didn't, you know, it was a bit soupier because of that, but it worked out okay.
So you don't, the porcelain with your colors, not your.
I find it really, you know, these are really bright colors. It's, you know, bright red, flame orange, intense yellow. And there's something about them on a white clay that for me, like, it's too much. But the darkness of the clay really affects them and sort of subdues them a little bit. And I think also gives them a bit more depth. That's what I like about this clay. But I did used to work in white clay, but that was more when I was doing like glaze stuff, like decoration with glaze, different glazes. So I got this cup, and I'm just gonna outline that circle the same way that I outlined the newspaper resists in a contrasting color. And I'll just chat a little bit about the things I'm thinking about differently, you know, with when I'm decorating a 3-dimensional object as opposed to a flat surface. One of the things I love doing plates and platters because it is just this blank canvas. The funny thing, you know, with a mug or a tumbler, they're actually just as much work, if not more, sometimes than like a serving bowl, because there's that handle and like really thinking about the surface in this different way. So I want there to be nice sort of movement all the way around the cup. I think about this seam that I purposely leave in my hand-built cups as sort of this mark of the maker, and, you know, asking people to be aware that it's made by hand and aware of me, the maker. I think of that as the front of the cup and where I want the user to drink from. So, you know, I want the decoration to look good the whole way around. So I've outlined that in blue, and then I'm going to pick, this is when I'm going to use one of those newspaper text elements. And so this circle is sort of more oriented from the top. And so I want the next element to be more oriented from the bottom. I really have an aversion to diagonal lines in my decoration. I don't know why. I like things very kind of rooted, I think. That's just, again, a personal aesthetic choice. So I'm going to have part of this element. And again, this is, you know, the text element of my work. You wouldn't know unless I told you that this is from, you know, a cursive writing letter. I just really love the gesture and think it's beautiful, and it does have that added deeper layer of meaning, but I tend to, you know, shy away from using the whole word. Like this, I had recently started scanning the old recipe cards from the matriarchs in my family as sort of a way to commemorate domestic labor and feminine domestic labor. But, you know, I don't want to just put this is peel. I don't want to like peel on a plate. It ends up, then people get all fussed, like, what does it say? What does it mean? So I would more like just take, you know, this element and then that element and sort of just use them as there's meaning there, but I don't need the user to know that part. Anyway, bit of a tangent there, but I'm just going to cut this one into, I have these, really like these little tiny scissors I have. They're nice for detail stuff. And then for the color that I'm just trimming this other end a little bit. The color that I'm going to add for this newspaper that I'm going to have on the pot, usually what I'll do, I've got blue outlining that circle, so then I'll do this in blue. So it kind of references. if that makes sense.
We have a couple questions about the laser cutter and newsprint. Is the newsprint too thin essentially, or how many layers of newsprint can you use at a time when it's being cut?
Oh yeah, so the reason, like, and some people do these techniques using like just regular printer paper, which you can cut on those craft cutters, like a Silhouette or a Cricut cutter that people use for scrapbooking and stuff. I've tried cutting newspaper on those before, and it's too thin and it just kind of tears and doesn't work very well. So, and I prefer the texture of the newspaper for my surfaces, but you can use paper, regular copy paper. It just works a different effect. When I'm cutting the newspaper in laser cutter, it's obviously, there's ventilation in a laser cutter because of the fumes. And I usually try and cut 3 layers of newspaper at a time, but then have it sandwiched on the top with a thicker layer of cardstock, and just adjust the settings so that it cuts through all 4 layers. And the cardstock is sort of a waste layer. I've done some other things with that stuff, but which I'll show in a little bit. But yeah, it'll cut through all 3 layers. I mean, you could do more. It's tricky because the laser, obviously, it's cutting through with heat. So, and paper is flammable. So if it's too thick, like too many layers, I think you would get into an issue where it would set on fire, which is, so I've got that in blue, and then I've got this other element. So I'm sort of thinking about, this one's rooted from the top, this one's coming from the bottom, and then going around the cup, I'm going to have another one over here coming from the top. And I think I'm going to do that. I'm going to outline this one in orange, and so then I'll do this one in orange stuck down. So just sort of balance those colors, if that makes sense. I wish I had a laser cutter. You can get like hobby versions, but even the hobby versions are like $3,000 or something like that. Luckily, normally just rent time. Like a lot of libraries or community maker spaces have laser cutters you can use, although, obviously they're not open right now. So I kind of have a limited supply of them. Just sticking that down. And that, laser cutting, it just sort of came about through trial and error in school, and actually when I was at Haystack, which is one of those great craft schools in the US, just outlining that in orange. They have a wonderful fab lab that I was able to use and sort of try out some of these techniques for the first time. I'm gonna go in with some yellow on this. Oops. And when I'm decorating a round thing, I do tend to like have my hand inside expanded to hold it. Although I find after a day of decorating, the small stuff is actually harder on my body because I'm like holding this position and my shoulder gets kind of sore. So I've been trying to figure out different ways. Someone was talking about a jig, sort of like that someone has coming off their table for things. That could be worth trying. Just to, I always say this when I do a workshop at a school, or talk to students, like your most important tool is your body. One of your most important tools as an artist is your body. And so trying to and that's one of those like do as I say, not as I do kind of things. I'm really bad at it. Although, with the forced staying at home, I have been doing my yoga every morning, which is good. So now this little tray is ready for some white slips. I'm gonna do that. So as you can see, that's why I like to have a couple of things on the go so that I can, while I'm waiting for this cup layer to dry, I can then go put white slip on this, and then maybe that'll be dry. I can kind of move around.
Do you normally work sitting down?
I don't. Well, sometimes I have a couple different table heights in my studio. I normally work standing, actually. I try and, sometimes decorating, I do sit down. I try and vary it. So I have this table height, and then a standing table as well, which is where I do most of the construction, at the standing table. But I try and vary it so that I can like move, not in any one position for the whole day, because that's what's really hard on your body. We're not meant to do these things, you know, over and over again for the whole day. So I try and vary it if I can, but it's, you know, sometimes tricky.
Did you develop this process in grad school, or did you say, where was the craft school that you used the laser printer for the first time?
Yeah, so it all sort of developed in grad school, and you know, it's continued to evolve afterwards. But yeah, Haystack was the craft school where I sort of started introducing the laser cutter, and then I didn't. This work really started coming together in the last year of grad school, year and a half of grad school, basically. It's, you know, obviously continued to evolve since then. But you know, I've been really fortunate to get to work with so many wonderful artists in our field and work at different residencies, and I just think it's great to be able to, when you're learning, to try and, you know, take as many workshops. Or I always love watching other makers touch clay, even if you know, they work in a completely different way from me. One of the first visiting artists when I was at LSU was Tip Tolan. If you're not familiar with her work, she's in Seattle, Washington area. She's this incredible figure sculptor. And she, you know, she works beautiful. She uses like a serrated, so one of these serrated tools. She has them in all sorts of different serrations and sizes, and she uses those to sculpt with. And I'm convinced that sort of some of my use of texture in this tool is like from watching her use it, you know, which again, you wouldn't think that my work was influenced by a figure sculptor. But it was.
Yeah, it's so interesting where people get their inspiration from.
Yeah, yeah. And even just the, you know, the little moments, you know, when you're at a residency, you know, that things that develop there. I'm just gonna let that. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Here, yeah, I'll peel up these newspaper things now that we're on the side view. So normally I wait for this newsprint to set up a little more, or the slip rather, to set up a bit more, because I don't like it, especially for the fine little bits. If I'm peeling those off, they can sometimes tear and then fall into the wet slip. So I try and avoid that, but it's just easier to get her done now. And these circles are a bit easier to peel off. So I'm gonna
fun part.
Peel them off. Yeah, this is the best part. I often joke, if you're somebody who likes picking at scabs, this is like totally the thing for you. So this is when you really start to see the composition come together.
Do you ever leave the paper on and just burn it out?
Great question. So sometimes that happens with like the littler bits by accident. And then for something like that, where there's this circle there, and it, like these ones, the circle came off the edge, so I could easily peel it away. I'm just going to use my pin tool to sort of pick into it and lift it off. So this is a really nice one. It shows you that some of those layers coming through.
Oh yeah, right there.
So you can see the different colors and how that sort of texture is really showing through. With the newspaper burning out, sometimes with like little tiny bits, I'll forget a little piece. And so it's fine if it goes through the bisque, because you can, but you need to catch it after the bisque, because what will happen is the newspaper will burn away, but there'll be this white slip pocket over it. And so if I catch it at the bisque, I've never not caught it at the bisque, and then I can just use my X-Acto and sort of chip away the slip and sand it a little bit. Because if I didn't catch it, then what would happen is I would glaze it, and there would be this sort of air pocket under the glaze that would eventually break, and that would be sharp and not nice. So you do wanna, it's not the end of the world if you forget one, but you wanna make sure to catch it. Excuse me. I'm just gonna let this set up just a touch more. The slip, you can see it's still a bit shiny. And so or the underglaze, if I put the white slip on now, the underglaze would blend in with the slip a bit. Sometimes that can be a little nice, but I don't love it when the underglaze bleeds into the slip. So what I'm gonna show you is one of the last steps that I do. And this is on one that I decorated earlier beforehand. And so the slip is dry. It's like leather hard, basically, the slip. And so with this one, I feel like it needs a little bit more compositionally going on. So I want to go in and add another line quality because, you know, one of my favorite quotes is more is more and less is a bore. It's the Iris Murdoch. I'm getting the last name wrong, but she's got that, like the older woman with beautiful silver hair and these like great glasses. Loves pattern and texture. And so, you know, and also, as I did mention before, I'm a little bit of a masochist. I like to just add another step whenever I can make it take longer, right? And this actually developed I started doing this when I was at Sonoma Ceramics, and it was through a conversation with Kayla Stein, who's the director there. And she was, you know, one of those things just passing through the studio. And I'd started decorating these big platters, and I'd gone a little too much on the slip. And so the slip was really kind of thick, and it had obliterated a lot of the stuff underneath. I knew it was going to be too thick. And so I wanted to go back in and add something else. And Kayla was like, oh, what if you went in and added this graffito line into the slip? And just one of those like moments where someone says like, have you tried this? And I'm like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. Great idea. And it's now really, I think, important part of my work where it adds this whole other line quality. So I've got how I do those. I could just do it freehand, but I like to use, you know, forms. This is just a circle cut out of this is thicker cardstock, this is actually folder paper. And then I've also got these are some of those cardstock, that waster paper that I was telling you about. That's the top layer when I do the laser cutting. Some of those that I'll use as other shapes that I go in with. And so what I'm doing now is I'm going to use a little stylus thing. And this is, I think this was like a cake decorating thing for like making, you know, marzipan flowers or something like that. Just again, from the craft store. I love, well, previous to our current reality, I love wandering the aisles of like craft stores and hardware stores. Anyways, this is one of those tools, but it's sort of a plastic stylus. You could use a dull pencil as well. And what I'm going to do, I've got my my little cardstock thing, and I'm just going to sort of outline it with this stylus. And I'm basically just sort of carving through the slip and underglaze layer a bit. And it's important that you don't want to do it when the slip is too wet, because it would just, you know, it would get all kind of gummy. And it would also sort of dig a really deep line. So it's sort of awkward to do it this way, but make sure you can see. And so I'm just outlining it, and I'm just pressing pretty lightly.
Are all your pieces slab built?
They are all slab built. I used to be a wheel thrower. A lot of them are slab built on wheel thrown forms, like on disc molds. So now I've got that line, that sort of faint line, and you may be able to see there's sort of these burrs around it. It's really important to resist the urge to clean those up right now, because if I tried to clean them up right now, I would make a mess of it. And they would get in, you know, it would mush into the white slip. And so what I do is I wait until it's bone dry, and I take a clean brush and I just sort of brush those off over a bucket of water. So I'm not adding dust to my studio, and it, you know, it gets those burrs off. If I try and deal with it now, it's just gonna smudge into the clay. So that just adds this other nice line quality in there. You know, one of the things I think about with my work, especially these days when so much work is consumed online, you know, from a photograph, whether it's on Instagram or a website or something like that. So much work is consumed and purchased online. And I never want the work to be a disappointment in person. It's really important. My favorite compliment to get is that your work is so much nicer in person than it is in photos. And I try, you know, work pretty hard to take nice photos, but I want there to be surprises that you just can't notice in a photograph. And so something like that line, you maybe sort of see it a little bit, but it really rewards the user paying closer attention to it and spending time with the object. And that's something that's important to me. And you know, often like in my cups, on the bottom of the inside, there'll be texture or something, again, that you really don't notice unless you see the object in person.
I can definitely attest to that. I love how your work, you have so much thought into the person that's going to be using your pieces and the food that's going to be in it and on it, and you think all that through. And I think, yeah, the detail.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Lacey. I think functional pots are, you know, this really powerful vehicle for conveying content and ideas. You know, one of the things I talk about in my artist statement is, or like an artist lecture, is how, you know, in a museum or gallery, you know, the average time that someone spends in front of a painting or any given piece of art in a gallery or museum is 17 seconds. Versus, you know, my, you know, mug or cup could be in someone's life for decades, potentially, day in, day out use. And I think that's a really powerful thing. And it's a big motivator for me as a maker, for sure. The last thing I wanted to show was some of the things something that I do at the bisque stage. Again, because I want to just add more things to do. With my work, you know, when I'm constructing it, and I talk about this when I do like a making demo, I leave sort of all these seams and lines and edges visible, and I accentuate them, and I want to call attention to those, as I think, you know, they're really important moments in the work for me and for what I'm trying to convey. And so what I do, this is one of my cups that's bisqued. Sadly, I chipped it. So it's now perfect for this kind of demonstration. What I'm going to do now is go into some of those edges and lines and add a little pop of underglaze to sort of accentuate that line. And I do it for my signature at the bottom too. It's sort of tricky to see.
Back up a little.
Pardon?
Go
Back
down
up?
a little. Oh, almost.
Yeah, it's not very bright there. You can kind of see I forgot to grab the other cup. Oh, this one, you can see it better here. And then these edges, there's sort of like this pop of orange in that edge. So the way I do that is at the bisque stage, I go in and I have these little squeeze bottles of my underglazes that are thinned out just a little bit, and they've got they often get jammed, so I have this little hat pin that I use to clean it out.
What temperature do you bisque?
Pardon?
What temperature do you bisque at?
Oh, I bisque hot. I bisque to 04 because it helps with some of the finicky stuff with my clay. So I'm going to go in, and so this is actually there's a little line inside of that circle that I'm going to go in, and I just trailing the underglaze in that line that I put in with this at the leather hard stage, and do that for like all the, you know, I go around the edges at the top, and I would do it at the bottom too. I'm going to do it in my signature. And then what I do, and I'm not really worried about like it's bleeding out, you know, it's not perfectly in that line. then I get a clean sponge, clean water. And I'm just wiping it. No, and this was sort of not a great example because I just wiped it away. But usually you can kind of see there and in there how it's that yellow has gone in that line. And here you can kind of see, again, it's one of those details that you really notice when you're closer to the object. And if you did want to get close to my objects, I do have work for sale, a bit of work for sale online in the US at companiongallery.com. And I'm also happy to, if folks want to reach out to me on Instagram, I'm happy to work with folks directly too. For people who are in the US, I try and direct them to my galleries, one because I want to support my galleries, but I also, the work is already there. And so I'd rather sell work directly from my studio to folks either in Canada or internationally who maybe have less ability to get it through this, a little trickier through the US. So I'm just going to put white slip on this cup, and then I think we'll be sort of at the, how am I for time, Lex?
Yeah.
We've got what?
Plenty of time. Well,
Okay.
half an hour. No, till 6. Let me just double check. Can you real quick talk about why you do that inlay at the bisque stage versus pre-bisque?
Yep. Yeah, that's a great question. Just shuffling some things here. I do it when, these, if I wanted to do it at this stage, I would then have to wax it to get that mishima, or like this tip, this is a metal tip on this bottle, it would kind of dig into the softer leather hard clay. And they're also pretty, I don't want to do much to them bone dry because they're fragile, and I've done so much work on them that to lose something when it gets to the decorated stage is really tough. So by doing it at the bisque stage, it's a lot easier too, because I can just, I don't have to be super careful about where I am. I can handle the piece a little rougher. So it just makes it a bit easier that way. The other reason for it is it works in the workflow. Like, as I said, I'll get the work out of the bisque kiln, and then I wet sand everything. And then what I'll often try and do is wet sand and then and do the color inlay. Oh,
Laura? Laura, I think you're accidentally screen sharing. Can you unscreen share, please? Laura? I don't know how to override that.
we can just go to the side view for me, can you? Or
Hi, Laura, can you unscreen share? Laura?
As the host, you might be able to override it if you try to screen share, and I think it might force it to stop.
Okay.
I'm not sure, but it might work.
We'll try that. Okay. Here we go.
You can unscreen.
Thank you.
Oh, there we go.
thanks.
Okay, back to regular program.
Oh, I think I was mentioning the sort of workflow when I get out of the bisque kiln. I wet sand everything, and then I do the color inlay, and then I'll wax anything that I want to be bare clay. And then normally, because I try and do that sanding, the wet sanding and the inlay of color in the same day, so that, because I'm then introducing a fair bit of moisture to the bisque, so then I want to let it dry overnight at least before I'll then glaze it. And so that it just works a bit better with the workflow, and I don't have to be as careful with the work. But you certainly could do some of this as mishima. I think it would just take a ton longer. So anytime I can do something in clay that sort of removes a step later on or makes something a little bit easier, I always try and do that, because this, clay there's so many parts in the process that are difficult and that are, challenging, So, and where there's room for mistakes. So anytime I can sort of remove something like that, I try and do that. So I'm going to put the white slip on this, and then I'm going to go back and sort of finish some of those other things. I forgot this one we scheduled. I think I've got another 25 minutes or so, right, Lex? And then we open up to questions, or?
Yeah, half an hour
Yeah.
to open up to questions.
So I'm gonna, again, just keep the cup in my hand, and then I've got the white slip here. And I usually use a slightly smaller brush on the cups, and I'm sort of gonna think about where I usually am outlining the newspaper bits. And again, need to be, I don't want if the slip was too thin, it would just start like dripping all over the place. So it needs to be kind of thick enough that it's not doing that.
A couple of people are asking about wet sanding again.
Yeah, sure. Just in general, sort of going over what
process and why.
Yeah. Yeah, so again, I want, because I'm leaving those sections bare clay, I want that to be really nice and smooth, and the bottoms especially. The reality is a handmade object like this is a luxury object. As soon as you're spending more than $5 for a mug, it's a luxury. It's a luxury I choose to afford in my life, and many people do, but it's still, it's a luxury object. So I remember once years ago, before I sort of started sanding my work, and I was making very different work, a friend of mine, she had this beautiful granite countertop, and she bought some of my pots, and I saw she put these like little felt pads on the bottom of my pots, because she did, they had like scratched her granite countertop, and like that's, I don't want that to happen. So I want them to be really nice and smooth to the touch. And I like that contrast. So that's one of the reasons for the wet sanding, is it's sort of, with my clay, it buffs it a little bit, and like makes it really nice and silky smooth. Not all clays can take sanding. So again, it's something you want to test. And the other reason I'm doing it is those areas where I pull up the newspaper resist, like, here, those areas around the circle with the slip, that's actually kind of a sharp edge. So by, hitting that just ever so lightly with the wet sandpaper, it just softens that edge, so that when I then get glaze on it, it's not going to be really sharp. And so what I do is I wet sand at the bisque. I like wet sand everything. I just have a clean bucket of water, the work, and then these sanding pads, and it's Norton sanding sponges. You can get them in Canada pretty easily at the Home Depot. And I use the 220 grit. They do kind of wear down a bit quickly, and I don't love having to throw them out. So I'm trying to find an alternative. There's the diamond sanding things. Sometimes those are actually too aggressive, I find, and they really dig into the clay. I just want something that's sort of buffing it. And then, so I do that at the bisque stage, and then once it comes out of the glaze kiln, these bare clay areas, and that's right, at the bisque stage, I would wet sand kind of the whole pot, focusing more on the bare clay areas and any of those like slip edges. After the glaze firing, I'm just wet sanding the bare clay areas. So the rim, this little the circle, and the foot, or on another, the handle or the outside of a bowl or something like that, just to really polish them. And that is with a 600 grit, like, that black emery paper that you can use. And it just sort of like polishes it really nice and smooth. Again, I don't want it, I want these objects to feel really comfortable and warm in someone's hand, and smooth, and not be sharp. And I think it's those little details and those little moments that, the user probably doesn't even know that I've done that, but they do notice that it's nice and smooth. So that's important to me.
You wax the area, the circular area on
No,
your...
so that circle, and I'll pull it away now. So that circle, I wax the rim and the foot before I decorate it, but for that circle, that's when I use the piece of newspaper that I got wet and I stuck on.
Right. But after, when you're glazing it?
Oh, yes. Yes, sorry. Yes, I wax that circle as well. And it, because there's sort of that edge from the slip, it actually helps keep the wax, like helps me wax that pretty easily. So it's not, I mean, it is a bit tedious. That is one of the more tedious parts of my process. But that's the one thing that, like with the waxing and sanding and the color inlay that I do at Bisque, that's when I'll throw a TV show on in the studio or something like that. I can, you know, it's sort of mindless enough that I can do it while watching TV or doing something else. So like treat myself to a guilty pleasure.
What's your guilty pleasure?
Oh,
What show?
I don't know that I want to admit that. My favorite all-time show to watch in the studio, it's not on Netflix anymore, but is 30 Rock. I've watched that whole series like several times because every time I watch an episode, I find something new funny. Like it's one of those shows that like there's so much going on with the different characters. But that's not really a guilty pleasure. That's a good one. Yeah, and I may have watched some horrible Netflix reality show about large cats recently. Tiger King.
I think everyone has watched that.
Yeah, which was just, that I watched that when like all this first started, as I think many people did, and it's just so awful but hard to look away from. So I just wiping that
With
rim.
your mugs, do you decorate before you add your handle, or you add your handle first?
Good question. Yeah, so all the forms are fully constructed before I decorate them. So the handles are on before I decorate them because I'm doing it all at the leather hard stage. And so I just decorate around the handle. Sometimes I will wax the handle as well. But yeah, so I that's why the mugs are super time consuming, honestly. Like as I mentioned earlier, you know, a mug is just as much work as a large serving platter, sometimes more, because there's all that extra consideration with the handle and then decorating around it and stuff like that. So, you know, and I think these objects are really, you know, something that you're putting to your mouth is really, that's an intimate thing to do. And so you really need to pay really close attention to that object in a different way from making from a platter that's, you know, maybe more showpiece or something. Speaking of, I know we're going to be working on, I just sent Sonoma Ceramics some info about doing a mugs and handle workshop, like a construction one, not surface, but making mugs and specifically sort of a deep dive into different handles. So that should be up in the next few days, hopefully, and I'll announce that on Instagram, and I'm sure folks will get an email or it'll be on Sonoma Ceramics stuff as well.
Somebody's asking about the green bleeding through your slip on your finished pieces. That's just from your underglaze, correct?
Oh, the green bleeding through. So one thing I do sometimes you'll see on my work, and maybe pull up to the side.
Sorry, hold on.
Oh, okay. It's sort of, you can see those little green dots. And then, yeah, I think she's probably talking about that halo around that. Sometimes I will trail, again, because I'm a masochist and like to add another step, I'll trail this sort of accent colored glaze around some of those edges. If I feel like it just needs a little something else. Sometimes I like to, my clear glaze and the underglazes are so static that it's nice to have a glaze that kind of moves a little bit and adds a little bit of another depth in. So that's something that I'll do something.
So that's a like greenish glaze that you.
Yeah, I think it's John's Blue glaze. I don't have that recipe on my website, but it just search John's Blue, and it's one that is a bit runnier, so it kind of moves a little bit, which it, again, adds another depth to the surface.
How many layers to your work?
I was just gonna pull these newspaper transfers off the cup. Again, the slip is mostly dry, so I don't like to, especially with these fine ones, you know, like this here, I don't like to pull that up if the slip is still wet, because sometimes they'll break. Like, you know, this is really fine, and sometimes it'll break, and then it would like fall into the slip in a way that's not that I hate when this, I don't like it when the slip gets marred up. That just looks, to me, that's like messy. So just using the, and then for drying the work, you know, I've introduced a lot of moisture to this work with that underglaze and the slip. And so I wanted to, you know, dry, and this is slab built, it's not thrown, so there's a seam on it. I wanted to dry really, really slowly. So what I do with my work, and the, you know, the little trays too that I want to dry flat, like I would dry those little trays with a weight in the middle of them, underneath a little piece of foam. What I do for drying my work in the studio, I actually cover, so I would have all, you know, like a board full of decorated cups or mugs or something, and they'd be on a drywall board, so it's absorbing some moisture from the bottom. And then I use these sheets. This is like an old Sesame Street sheet. Doesn't have to use Sesame Street sheets, but I think it makes it more fun. But specifically, you can see it's like an old worn cotton sheet. And I would drape everything. Once the slip is all, you know, set and not wet to the touch, I would drape the whole board in like a layer or two of these sheets, and then cover that in plastic. And what the fabric seems to do is it sort of helps even out the drying. And so you're not, you know, sometimes if you just have plastic over it, one, you'll get condensation areas in certain spots, potentially, which would then run onto the surface of the work, which I, you know, don't like, obviously. And it can also dry unevenly. And so by having the sheet, it seems to help it dry slower, because the sheet is then absorbing the moisture and then sort of evaporating it that way. And so I cover it in the sheet, cover it in plastic, let it sit for a day or two. Then I would take the plastic off, but leave the sheet on for a day or so, maybe even longer, depending on how, you know, humid or dry it is in the studio that I'm in, and let things dry very slowly. Again, I've put so much work into them at this point. I don't, when I try and force things to dry faster for any reason, that I always get into trouble with that. Sometimes things will, you know, crack along a seam, or I'll get cracks in the handles and stuff like that.
And the sheet you're using is dry. It's a dry
yeah,
sheet.
It is dry. Yeah. If there's something that I wanted to dry really, really slow, like if I was still working on it construction wise, like a bigger piece that I was like needed to work on for multiple days, what I would do is I would actually dampen the sheet with my mister, put the damp, you know, it's not so sopping wet, it's just damp over the work, and then mist the top of that and then cover it in plastic. And that can sort of help keep it dry. The way I keep my, like anything smaller, like a cup or mug, I have these drywall, or not drywall, these damp boxes. It's like a Tupperware bin that I put drywall, plaster rather, not drywall, pottery plaster in the bottom of. And so it acts like this little damp box, humidor kind of thing that keeps things really nice and moist. So, because I want to decorate all the work at the leather hard stage, I'm not, you know, and I don't want to decorate one cup at a time. I want to decorate a bunch of things at a time, because it's sort of a whole other process.
What do you use as your weights for your trays and stuff?
Yeah, so what I do with the trays, when they're drying, I have, you know, these like pieces of cone box foam. Ideally, I would use like a kiln post, like a 3 or 4 inch kiln post. I don't currently have a kiln of my own right now. I'm in the process of working that out. So I was in the process of working that out before all this started. And so it was on hold for a bit. What I then do, I've been using is actually just these, I have these glazed cups that I just put in there, and then I would cover that in fabric and let it dry slowly. Because they're flat, they do sometimes warp a little bit. I try not to handle the trays too much. And again, I'll get more into those trays the next workshop, which is, I think it's June 6th, this Saturday. I'm gonna finish decorating. I really kind of like this tile, so I'm gonna finish decorating this
Somebody asked whether you are a painter.
That's a great question. Yes, I do. I paint, but I paint on my pots. My lights just flicked. Oh. I know we're expecting thunderstorms, so hopefully I don't get cut off. That would be interesting. I could run up and grab some candles, I guess, but that would mean my Wi-Fi was out though. So anyways, fingers crossed.
Naomi?
Pardon?
Hi, this is Priscilla. Your class on the 6th of June, will that be repeated on the following Tuesday?
No, we just did 2 of the surface ones because we assumed that the surface would be the most popular, like what everyone was interested in. But I know if you take the classes, you do get, like, some people, because of time zones and whatnot, haven't been able to actually make it to the actual class, and so you get the recording. I mean, you can't, it's not real time, but you can sign up
Okay.
for recording if you can't make the time.
Great.
Yeah.
That's a great
Yeah.
option. And again, you'll get your recording of this class in 24 hours or less. So keep an eye out for that.
Yeah.
So those of you who aren't working along with Naomi can look at the recording and try and follow along, and you can pause.
And I know, like, I had notes from some people who, watched it live and then rewatched it, and they were like, oh my gosh, I got so much more from rewatching it, like stuff that I hadn't noticed. So, definitely take advantage of that. I think you can watch it, as much as you want. It's live for 2 weeks.
Yes.
And then it goes down after that. I was gonna say, oh yeah, if you're making stuff with these techniques, I'd love it if you tag me on Instagram so we can see what you're up to. And it's nice to feel connected to the wider world in this time. You can find me on Instagram at Naomi K, just the letter K, Clement. And I also post about upcoming workshops and things there. And if you're ever interested in having me out, when we can all travel again, if there's a clay studio in your area or something, I miss seeing people in person. Hopefully you got lots from this, but I think that, nothing replaces an in-person thing too entirely, but, so I'm just this.
Somebody asked a question a while ago, and it's kind of a bigger question. It's about your technique. Do you find that it reveals things to you day by day, or do you feel it will have an end?
Oh, like that I'll get tired of this technique? Yeah, that's interesting. I think, one of the joys and the struggles of being a full-time studio artist is like dealing with the day in, day out of it. Every job has its like not glamorous parts. And when I'm in the thick of production for like something like a Seco or a show where I'm making like I feel like I could become a mug making machine at times. And so I do like those moments when I can start to, just through those that like daily grind of production, I just grind, like it's pretty nice grind to have, but it can get a little tedious sometimes, not to lie about it. Just when I'm making mug after mug after mug. And so just add it, it helps, like I'll have just little things that I add, like new techniques, whether it's like recently I've been sort of writing little notes of my own on the pots, and that stems from a couple of things. One, when all this started with the pandemic, we're all really anxious and it's hard to be in the studio and feel productive. And I would write these little like notes of hope and solidarity on the pots, like it's all going to be okay, we'll be fine. So it's like sort of sending out messages to the world. And it was also that I was like, oh crap, I have a limited supply of these newspaper cutouts, so I have to like solve that problem in another way. And sometimes those kind of problems, like a supply issue or something that's like forced on you, can actually be a really great opportunity to try something new. So, I mean, it's interesting looking at my work now, like from my thesis show, which was really, you know, and I thought was like kind of the culmination of this work. You know, it was really just a jumping off point, a starting point, and the work has really evolved since then, if, you know, certainly more slowly. Yeah. So I hope that it's, you know, it feels like it's work that has staying power there. It is important for me to keep it fresh. I don't like it when it starts to feel formulaic. So, you know, like introducing new colors is something I've been doing, just slight, you know, color change, or small new techniques, or like the other day I was making handles, and I've been using, you know, I think all of us, we've been really in our homes a lot and paying attention to the objects that I use all the time, and noticing the pots that my eye falls on every day, or that I use a lot. There's this mug, Michael Connolly, that I have. It's this beautiful big, I have it down here, tea mug, and it's a 1-finger handle, and it's this big mug, and you know, you usually think of like a 1-finger handle for a smaller mug, but it leveraged so beautifully, and I was like, oh, so I started shifting, you know, this isn't on this size mug. I was like, well, I'm going to try and do alter the handle just a little bit. So sometimes those little questions are really what keep me going in the studio. Again, to answer the question, someone who had asked about the painting, if I painted, and I feel like I didn't totally answer that question. I'd like to paint actually like more on other surfaces. I did printmaking in undergrad, which I think is kind of evident in the work now. It's sort of, it's almost like these monoprint techniques that I'm doing, but I think printmaking is something I'd love to like go do a residency where I could spend some time doing printmaking or painting. I think it feels hard to do that kind of stuff in my studio now, when, you know, making a living as an artist is challenging at the best of times. And so it's hard sometimes to take time away to just play. So doing, you know, residencies are a nice way to sort of do that and try new things. So, but yeah, painting is, I'd love to do big wall tiles too, but just figuring out the logistics of those with like drawing and warping is a bit of a challenge. You know, and I've been moving around so much too, so it's you know, that I think I moved something like 9 times in 6 years. And 3 of those years I was in grad school in one spot. So it was a lot of moving, and it's hard, you know, so much change was happening in my life all the time. So the work was like one of those spots where there was some consistency. So I feel like now that I'm in one spot, I'm guessing things will eventually change a bit. I mean, again, now, you know, with the our current reality, smaller change feels more feasible as opposed to like big change that feels kind of daunting right now. But it's a great question.
Do you feel like your work is a timeline? Can you tell at what year, what point, when you made it, by what it looks like, and by these subtle changes you're talking about?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, previous to grad school, my work was so different. I mean, you can go on my website, which is naomiclement.com, and there's, if you go on the gallery, there's, you know, all you can see that's by year. So I think from like 2013 to present, and so you can see the progression. And in grad school, I was just trying new things like so quickly. And, you know, I think of grad school as, my sister's a doctor, and, you know, she did as doctors do medical residencies, which is like, you know, 3 years of like super intense hours where you're just like working crazy hours. And it's insane. And she's like, you know, there's literally no other way to learn the amount of information that you need to learn to be a doctor without this like insane immersive experience. She's like, if you tried to learn that same information like 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, it would take 10 years instead of 3. And so I think of like grad school is sort of that it's like 10 years of growth in, 2 or 3 really excruciating years that are, fun, but I wouldn't revisit, I don't want to go back. I'm glad I did it, but I don't want to go back. So I'm gonna pull up these things. But you certainly don't have to do grad school to develop your own voice as an artist. I feel like for me, it started coming together, there's this exercise called Notice What You Notice, like paying attention to your attention and the things that really strike that you're interested in visually and otherwise. And so nicely. This is one where I feel like it would really benefit from some additional line quality over here, because there's a lot of this really strong here. But once this sets up, I would go in and add, some other line quality here. So there's a bit more going on in the composition, but this has some neat things with the blue the orange coming through the blue. And that underpainting that is kind of exciting. And so it's funny, honestly, like these test tiles, whenever I teach a workshop, the test tiles are always like my favorite thing, because I'm usually, I'm talking and I'm doing other things, and I'm maybe not paying as close attention as I would normally in my studio, especially with the test tiles. And so I'm trying new color combos that I maybe wouldn't normally do. And that's where some really exciting moments can happen, is in these. So the nice thing is I'm in my studio, so I actually get to keep the test tiles. Normally I'm away and like can't, I want to leave them for the studio and can't travel back with them. So there's some really interesting moments and information I think that's happening in some of these. And that's also why I think these tiles are really great, is because they'll, again, like with the cup, you could see like I sort of had my formula a little bit for how I decorate that, because it's like I know that works and whatever. And that's where I start to try and push back against that kind of thing in the studio production, so that, because I want it to work, but I also want there to be some interest for me as the maker. So these test tiles can be a great way to just jump off of things.
I think people are encouraging you to make a big wall.
Yeah.
Your tiles.
So I did these, this is an example of one I did. It's not big. I tried to do bigger ones when I was at the Bray this summer. And this idea, so these are laminated, they're square extruded tubes that I laminated together, like scored and slipped together. So I wanted the tiles to have some dimensionality to them, and I wanted them to not warp and flat. The tricky thing with the tiles is that they, I'm introducing so much moisture to one side of the surface, like just to the top. And I've got all this texture and surface I spent a lot of time on, and I also don't want to muddy it. And so it's just tricky to get them flat. The ones I did on the Saturday workshop, I'm drying really slowly to try and see if I can. And I rolled these tiles specifically a bit thicker than I normally would, in the hopes of keeping them, because I would really like to figure out that, like, I don't know if people have ever seen Bobby Silverman's tiles. He makes these like gorgeous, massive tiles, but I think tile is like, big tile is tricky because they just, especially if you're decorating it wet. Like if I was decorating in that glaze, it would be easier. Yeah, but thank you. I would love to do that too. I'll figure it out one of these days. That was one of the things I wanted to do when I was at the Bray this summer, but it just, I did play around with these tiles a little bit, but kept having these, I think they kept cracking along the seams of those tubes. And I don't know, I think it was partly my clay and partly the construction of them. So it's one of those things I want to figure out. One fun trick or tool rather, I know potters are always junkies for tools. This is one, it's a woodworking tool. There's this great store in Canada called Lee Valley. And so I think it's like a wood carving tool. And it's like for for beveling an edge. It's Veritas, made in England, it says, and it comes in all these different sizes. And so now that this tile here, it's leather hard, I'm going to use this tool on the edge to soften that, because that, straight, that 90-degree angle is really kind of sharp and not very pleasing to look at, and doesn't look very finished. I feel like these ones too, even this size, would be nice to have like a trivet as a, like a hot plate or trivet. I should have maybe let them set up a little bit more, because the underglaze is mushing a little bit, but it kind of, you see how it knocked that edge down. So it just softened it. So I think I'd like to figure out how to make even just this size as like a, hot plate or trivet, or like little wall painting or something like that. The thing to me that's always so funny. So this is the template for my cup. And I often think about, if this was on the wall as a painting, you could charge like, I don't know, 150, 200 bucks easy for like a small painting, right? People, as soon as it's on the wall, they'll like pay that. But once you like make it into an object that's functional, it's like $200. Like you'd never, or it'd be tougher to get $200 for one of those. But not that it's all, not to be completely mercenary about it, but I also really enjoy playing around with the surface, and like some of the stuff like I was doing on these little tiles I showed earlier, those little tests from the gray, I think, wouldn't make as much sense on a functional object, but would be really fun on some tiles.
A couple people are asking about your big wall platters and how you hang them up.
Yeah, so then the foot that I do on them, it's like got an undercut on it this way, and fairly deep, like, so the foot goes out like that on the bottom, this is the bottom. And then I string a wire around it and sort of tighten it, and then like form a loop so that you can hang it. It's important to me that I don't like thinking about the orientation of the design when I'm making it. Like, I don't want to be like, this is the top of the thing. So, because you can like poke holes in the foot that you could then put a wire through that. So that's another way. But I just do it, I have an undercut on the foot this way. I've seen some people who do an undercut this way, like on the inside of the foot, that then it would hook onto like a screw. That feels a little precarious for something really big. So for those, I did the wire around them.
So you mentioned you don't have a kiln right now. Are you firing your pieces now?
Yeah. So I've been using a local friend. She's got a kiln that I've been using, and I'm just transporting the bisqueware, like the greenware and bisqueware, over there. It's not that far from me. It's like a 3-minute drive, but it is a pain and an extra step, and I don't love transporting greenware. But the trick that I have, and I'll show you, folks asked the last class, for transporting greenware, what works pretty well, right? I didn't lose a ton. So I have these plastic bins, and then I got this foam from, it's like a mattress cover, like a mattress pad rather, but like just, from, you can get from Target or whatever, and cut it up to fit in these bins. And then I wrap each piece with bubble, and, just like one layer. And then what I do is I have a bigger piece of this foam that the seats of my car fold down. I put on the bottom of, I've got a hatchback. So the bottom, a piece of foam, and then this goes on top of the foam, and then it's got foam there. And so this I feel like really helps with any shock absorption. And then each piece gets wrapped, not crazy, but like loosely with bubble. And I like to use foam. It's like foam roll when I'm shipping and packing work too. I prefer this packing foam to bubble, because the bubble, especially like on a handle, sometimes you'll get a thin spot. And this, I hate using all this plastic, but this stuff you can reuse. Whereas the bubble, I don't find you can reuse for very long. So that's another tip from me to you.
Are you glaze firing your work right now, or just bisque firing?
So right now, I just had an electrician come the other day. I'm gonna get the kiln set up. Because if we hit a second wave of this, I don't, it would be nice to just be completely self-sufficient. So I'm getting that. I was glaze firing at another kiln. Right now, I've just been stockpiling greenware because I know that I'm gonna get this kiln sorted in the next couple of weeks. So I just rather not have to transport it if I don't have to. But yeah, for glaze, I would glaze the work here. And that clear glaze recipe that I gave out it's a really hard, it's a hard glaze surface, even when it's like before it's been fired. So I just, glaze it all, let it dry overnight, and then wrap it up and bring it over. I'm not quite as careful when it's at the bisques. It's already been bisqued because it's not as fragile.
What kiln are you planning on buying?
So I was gifted a kiln. It's like a Tucker's cone art kiln. I think it's like the 27-inch, and the taller one, but it doesn't have a computer controller. So I'm getting a new controller, like a new panel built for it, because I want a computer controlled kiln. So and that'll still, it still costs a fair bit of money, but at least it's cheaper than buying a new kiln, and it's, better for the environment and all that stuff, which is good. So, but I know at Sonoma Ceramics, it would be nice they had these those shorter scuts, but that were really wide. I'd love to have a variety of kilns so that I could have a wider one for making like the big platters. But then you want a tall one because you want to be able to make something with height. But then it's also nice to have like one like that would be nice for when you just need to get through a few pieces. But that's like a big, that's like dream studio, of the future someday when I win the lottery.
Good to have dreams.
Yeah, exactly.
Have you tested your slip on any other clay bodies? Do you notice, does it work on most clay bodies?
It's worked on other clay bodies for sure. It's just something you need to test in your environment, but there's no reason it shouldn't work. Yeah.
Somebody's asking about the rims of your cup, and how do you keep them so round where it almost looks wheel thrown?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let's grab something. So everything, a lot of the things that I make, they definitely reference the wheel because I was a wheel thrower for so many years. So the cups, I make them, I have that template that I cut out. I form this, do the rim, form the slab, and then I pop it on. This is actually just a little terracotta flower pot. I think like a 4-inch one that I pop it on that, or I have like a, you could use thrown ones as well that I put it on upside down, and that sort of helps keep it. Like if it was leather hard, I would, do it like that, and so to help it set up, and I would let it sit there for a little bit, and then attach the bottom and stuff like that. So that's a fun trick, and it's super easy. You don't even have to, if you're not a thrower, you can just buy one of those at the garden center.
Does your slip recipe go to cone 6?
Yeah, it should. That I take it to 5, like I fire to a hot cone 5, but yeah, it should. Again, you always want to test everything in your own studio, in your own clay and environment. But yeah, it's an all temperature recipe, so it should be fine, at like cone 04 to cone 10. Again, the caveat is that it depends, you need to test.
Yeah. Depends.
Did folks want I know the last time we did this, if anyone wanted to show what they'd been working on, or?
Yeah, now show and tell time, if anyone would like.
If there's anyone or anyone has.
Unmute yourself and I'll spotlight you.
You don't have to though.
I'm happy to share.
What's your name?
Larissa. Let's see if I can do this with my, oh, hey, I don't know why I have, let's see.
If you show your piece in front of your body, it should show up.
I have some bigger size.
Oh, in front of
Why
your
do I have I did not put myself with a Golden Gate Bridge behind me. Does anyone know how to take that off?
I do not.
If you click to the right of your Start Video button and you turn off your virtual screen, the Golden Gate Bridge will go away.
So
So it's
Just
the
see the little arrow to the right of the Start Video button.
Yep, I have FaceTime HD camera.
Choose virtual background.
Okay, none. There we go. Okay.
Looks great.
Okay, so I have a couple of these. I started with those hot colors like you had demoed. This one's so much going on, and then I've been working on some others. Where are they? Sorry, guys, it's hard
They look great.
to see, but yeah, having a lot of fun. Thank you, and it's nice to be able to do work alongside while you're talking.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
very nice.
Well, thanks for joining.
My pleasure. Yeah, I enjoy your work a lot. And I just purchased my first bowl recently, and you're right, it is more beautiful even in person than online.
Thank you. That's great to hear. And thank you. Well, and thanks everyone for supporting me and the Sonoma Community Center through taking this workshop. I keep saying if we don't want to find ourselves in a world, where our only options are and McDonald's, what we support now are the things that will exist when, we're allowed out in the world again. So thank you all for supporting me and the Sonoma Community Center, because I think institutions like that are really important to our whole community.
Thank you. We are a nonprofit art center and we have tons of classes. We're virtual this summer, so we have fiber arts classes, 2D, and ceramics classes. So it is a big help to have these classes and for the support. So thank you.
Yeah, and if anyone is looking ahead to, it feels like 2022 is, hopefully safe to plan for, and that's when NCECA is going to be in Sacramento in March of 2022. And Sacramento is what? It's like an hour and a half from
It's an
Sonoma.
hour and 50 minutes southeast of Sonoma.
Yeah, so you should.
North.
I said Sonoma was like planning, some stuff, and it'll be a great. And NCECA and Sonoma, one of the most, California in spring, like one of the most, Northern California in spring is one of the most magical places in the world. So I definitely recommend getting out to Sonoma if you can, if you go to NCECA.
Naomi, are you still in California or have you relocated?
So I'm in Canada right now. I was just in Sonoma for 6 months for residency back in 2008, but I'm back in Canada now. I'm Canadian.
I'd just like to say thank you
Thank
for
you
making it available at a time that was good in Australia. I see so much great work coming out of America, and it's so wonderful to have access to the artists like this. So thank you so much.
Oh, thanks so much for participating. I'm so glad the time worked out for you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Somebody is complimenting your ability to teach and articulate every detail of what you do. They're wondering, how did you start to think that way? Did that come from, having to teach?
Oh, well, thank you. That's very kind. I think like I'm someone, I really learn by doing. I'm not a sketcher. I'm a thinker, but like I learn through making. And so I think I always, and it takes me a while to process things. And so I like to teach sort of in that, like in circular patterns. Like I teach, demonstrated the same thing, multiple times, but in slightly different ways. And so I think it's that, like figuring out what works for me as a teacher, and in the class, having taught in a bunch of different classroom settings, taught in academia, I've taught, workshops in community centers, and I've taught kids and, seniors and, professional artists. And so I think that's all helpful, but I appreciate the feedback. Thank you. I think also too, learning from teachers who've been, so generous with me. And I think that's one of the things a lot of us, I love about the ceramics community is how generous other artists are, right? With their techniques or recipes and stuff like that. And so I always try and pay that forward when I can. I remember once asking Linda Arbuckle a question, like, oh, do you ever like keep something back at a workshop so that people won't go out and copy your work? And she was like, I have favorite pieces that I've made that I can't even recreate them, and I made them. So it's like, I think that's a fun thing about doing this kind of thing is hopefully it plants a seed in other people, and you try it out, and then you develop it in your own way. And that's why I love it if you tag me on Instagram or social media with what you're doing, is to see how the processes evolve in other people's hands. Ideas.
So we have a clarifying question about your cups and rims and the terracotta pot. Do you just use that pot just to quickly shape it, but not dry it on the?
Oh yeah. So I just use it to sort of quickly shape it, and then I'll sometimes, I have some other little forms too that once I put the bottom on, I'll leave it on for just like a couple of minutes and let it set up a bit. Because the bisque is absorbing moisture from it. I wouldn't want to leave it on for very long to dry, because it would crack on that, because it would shrink too much. So I just use it for a few minutes to set up and then take it off.
Does anybody have anything they want to share? Did anyone else work alongside?
Yeah, I did. I'll show mine.
What's your name?
I'm Kate. So
Okay.
I tried one on a sort of slump mold thing, just a quick one.
Okay, let's spotlight you.
Oh, cool.
So
I
there's
love
that
it.
one. And then just a couple of tiles.
Nice.
And I'm working in my car park in the lockdown. So this is all on my car bonnet.
Oh. Oh my gosh. Oh, and you're in like,
Is that a public?
oh, that's wonderful. So great. Thanks for sharing, Kate.
Cool.
Where are you coming from?
From Melbourne in Australia. Yeah, it's freezing here.
Like winter.
You can probably tell
right.
from there.
Well, thank you.
So just again, oh, somebody has a question about your banding wheel. What is on your banding wheel?
Oh yeah, so it's this silicone thing that my friend Mark Arnold gave me, and it just sort of sticks down with a little moisture to the bat. It's called stickybats.com. It's just like, and so when I've got these little bisque molds, it kind of just grabs the bisque mold on the wheel head, the banding wheel. And this is one of those Shimpo banding wheels, the crazy heavy ones that you don't want to drop on your foot. And yeah, it's worth investing in a good banding wheel especially if you're going to decorate or hand build. Decorate a lot or hand build. So
just to reiterate, everybody, we're going to be sending this recording in about 24 hours. So keep an eye out. And it will be up for 2 weeks. It'll expire after 2 weeks. Yeah. Thank you again for supporting us. Any more questions? Oh, are you selling your work where you are, or at the Companion Gallery only?
So Companion Gallery is my main gallery right now in the US. They're a bit low on work, but I'm hoping to get them some more soon. And then, Canada is tricky with online galleries because shipping here is so much more expensive. So, but I'm happy to deal with Canadians and international folks directly. Or if there's something very specific that you're looking for that you don't see, you can shoot me a direct message on Instagram. I'm a bit behind on things at the moment just because of my kiln situation and and pandemic. But I can add, I have sort of a list of things that folks want, and I can let you know when I've got things available.
What are your most popular pieces? What sells the most?
Mugs, for sure. Mugs, definitely. And those are the I love, and I get it because I love buying mugs, and I love collecting mugs, and it's not that I don't like making them. I think I just feel like I could be a mug making machine, as I said at some points. So, but definitely mugs. My favorite things to make I love making bowls. I posted a photo on my Instagram the other day I just love the way a wearboard full of leather hard bowls looks. It's like the most satisfying sight ever to me personally. So that's one of my favorite things to make. Yeah.
Somebody is talking about how they didn't get much color from the underglaze stencils. They're wondering maybe it's the poor quality of newsprint, old newsprint, or not enough underglaze, or all three.
Maybe that. It could also be how wet, like the wetness of your piece. Sometimes if the piece is really dry, like it's a bit drier on the drier side of leather hard, then it dries faster and doesn't absorb as much with the newspaper, it seems like. So it could be that, and yeah, just maybe a thicker coat of underglaze on the newspaper. I would give that a try. And so yeah, some of the underglazes are a bit thinner in the jar, so you can let it dry out a little bit.
Is there a bowl workshop in the future?
Yeah, we were thinking about a bowl workshop. And yeah, the bowls I slab build those as well, but I use like a bisque mold for those. Some of the bowls and the other forms are a little trickier to have folks working alongside me while I do it, because they are reliant on a bisque mold or a mold of some kind. So that's sort of the only thing there. It would be more of like strictly demonstration. I mean, you can still send tool list and how so that you can make them later on in your studio, but it's yeah, I can certainly do one on bowls. I do love making them.
Will you be posting any photos of these things that you're making during this workshop?
Yeah, so I know people had asked about that in the last one. And yeah, I'd like to do that, to post photos of them again. It's just going to take me a little while with the kiln stuff and everything to move the work through. But I will certainly, if you follow me on Instagram, I will eventually get to it. I promise. I'll put a sticky note on my wall. I feel like I have squirrel brain these days. I'm like all over the place.
Yeah.
Not focusing on stuff. But if I put it on a sticky note, I'll remember.
I'll remind you.
Okay.
Somebody asked a question that I feel like I could answer. Is your studio really always this clean?
Oh, no.
Well, yes. Naomi was the cleanest resident we have.
Oh, really?
I've experienced here in the Sonoma Community Center.
Oh,
so, congratulations. Cleanest
Oh,
and disorganized. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good to hear. I didn't think I was that clean. It's often some of the mess is the other side of the camera right now, or other boxes. But I've seen Mark Arnold. His studio is like spotless. My studio is in my home, so I do try and keep like dust down and stuff like that, just because it's obviously a health and safety thing. But
do you have any of your wall platters for sale or on Instagram?
Where it has, if you're looking for a bigger wall platter, the Archie Bray Gallery. And if you shoot me a direct message, I can send you the email of the person at the Bray Gallery. They have one of my favorite platters is in Montana right now. This is a beautiful big one that I did, and I left at the Bray because I only had so much room in my car. And so I think that's one of the few ones that is still available, and it's one of my favorites. So if you shoot me a direct message or you can email me, it's naomi@naomiclement.com. I'd be happy to put you in touch with them. I think they had a couple, but that were, I left some pretty nice work there. So if I do say so myself.
Do you own a slab roller?
I do. That was a recent purchase. I did not until a couple months ago. I was rolling all my slabs by hand, which was starting to give me some shoulder issues, actually. I just have a big rolling pin, and I use different thicknesses of dowel. But that happened. I bought a slab roller just before, like a little bit before this all started, and it's awesome. It's one of the, it's a Frema slab roller, so I think it's like a made in China one, so it's less expensive, but it's really good. It's important to me to have like a wider slab roller and one that can, obviously easily vary heights and stuff like that. So it's good. I've been happy with it. It was under it's $1,000 Canadian, so it's well under 1,000. Would be well under 1,000 US. So if you're someone who makes a lot of slab built work, it's definitely worth investing in something like that to save your body.
What was your email address again? Sorry, Naomi.
It's Naomi, Naomi, at naomiclement.com. Thanks, Lexi.
What I thought, but I just wanted to make sure.
And one thing I want to mention too, with these, now that I'm in my own studio, when I'm cleaning out my, underglazes are expensive, and I'm pretty liberal with them when I use them. Now that I'm in my own studio and not moving around all the time, though, when I'm cleaning my brushes, this has the red on it, and I've got this is an old jar of the bright red that I've got just water in, and so now I clean the red brushes in that, and so then I get, I can reuse it as I usually use that as like a wash more, but it just, it adds up. So I just clean the brush in that water first, and then I clean it in a bigger bucket to get it fully clean. But just a little tip there in terms of conserving materials.
Thank you for being so generous with your work. A lot of good comments.
Oh, good. Thank you, everybody, it's fun. It's as someone, I work in my studio by myself all the time, so workshops are my chance to like get out and socialize. So I know this is a different type of socializing, but it's nice to connect with folks nonetheless in these strange times, these unprecedented times. Is anyone sick of that word yet?
Yeah. There's definitely silver linings to it.
Yeah, and I think that the nice thing with these workshops, it's been so great. I was a bit worried about doing them at first. I think, I was like, well, I don't want it to mean I don't ever do workshops in person again, because I love doing those. But I think what's nice, obviously, is it makes it accessible to people, like in Australia, or, I know the last one, there were a couple folks who, they're moms who, working moms, and they can't really get away for a couple days or just too far away. And so, but they can participate for a few hours in something. So it's nice to reach more people. And in places that I know there was someone from Dubai at the last workshop. And much as I'd love to travel to Dubai, it's not likely to happen anytime soon. So.
Somebody said that they would love to have you come to UH Maui College Ceramic Studio someday.
Ooh, I would be thrilled to do that. So shoot me.
Her assistant.
So like, Hawaii is on my bucket list. So. And I love teaching workshops everywhere. I do miss the teaching at the university level, that sort of type of mentorship. I enjoy that a lot. So I love connecting with students.
Sounds like nobody has any more questions. Anybody? I had already requested your workshop at the Hawaii Potters Guild in Honolulu before this all happened. Amazing.
Whoever you are, I will, if that comes through, let me know, and I will personally hand deliver you a mug. Yeah, I saw someone, underglazes. Oh, I just buy the pints because I go through so much. If I'm trying out new colors, I'll buy you can get the little, ounce ones. I do of the red. Last year, I bought a gallon of the bright red. It was expensive, but it was a lot cheaper to buy it this way than to buy it in the pints, and because I go through so much of it. So.
Great. Any other questions? Crickets. Well, thank you all so much for being here and participating, and all of Naomi's underglaze recipes, or her white slip recipe and her clear glaze recipe, is on that link that was sent to you before when you signed up for the class, and her list of underglazes that she uses, and some places where you can find her work, and her Instagram and her email address, so you can direct message her if you're interested in purchasing work. And yes, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you so much, Naomi.
Oh, well, thanks for doing such a great job hosting, Lexi. That's awesome. It's been good to see you, and I appreciate so much everyone coming.
Yeah, and keep an eye out for her upcoming mug workshop and her tray workshop.
Oh, yeah, and I was going to say, I think folks get sent a survey, so we certainly, if there's certain classes that you're interested in doing specifically, like getting specifically taught by me, or other ideas that you have, please include those in the survey, and certainly appreciate the feedback. I'm new to giving these, and I know Sonoma Ceramics is starting. So if there's feedback as to what I could do differently, I'm always happy to learn and hear that. So
yeah, you'll get the evaluation link when you get the recording, and like Naomi says, it really helps us with our programming, and it helps us cater things to you guys. So we really want to make it as best as possible. So your feedback is really appreciated. Thank you. All right, I guess we'll sign off.
Awesome.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks again, Lexi. And you should, me and Kaylin need to do Zoom drinks sometime. So.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, Alex. I'll talk to you later.